must admit I felt overwhelmed over the last couple of days, having to step away from the news, feeling as if there was no exit, to invoke Jean-Paul Sartre. Um, but, you have to step away from these things, from these moments, gather yourself, because it's a long-distance race, and re-enter the fray. And so we want to begin where we always begin, and that's with Israel. Well, Israel is continuing its military incursions in Gaza City, and the devastation is mounting. The horrors are mounting in so many ways. And the U.S. has done it again for the sixth time in the UN Security Council. It has vetoed a resolution, the draft of a resolution for calling for an immediate ceasefire and an immediate release of all the hostages held by Hamas. So what this says to you and me, that we are complicit in this evil because our country refuses to rein in Israel in this moment, just refuses to say an unconditional ceasefire. Let's end the killing of innocents in the Gaza Strip and release all the hostages. No. They said it's not sufficient. There's not a sufficient condemnation of Hamas, not a sufficient affirmation of Israel's right to defend itself in the resolution. And, that's a bunch of BS in my view. What we know is that organizations across the board have condemned what Israel is doing in response to the horrors of October 7th as genocide. Even Senator Bernie Sanders has finally come out and said he has to admit that Israel is committing genocide. Now, as I've said over and over again, you can get hung up on the legal term. What I'm more interested in, right, is ending the senseless murder of babies, the senseless murder of men and women in Gaza, and ending it right now. So let's keep our eyes on that region. There's so much happening in the news that we could lose sight of it. Let's just keep our eyes on the flotilla and how Israel will respond to the flotilla. If they, many nations have warned the state of Israel not to respond with outsized force in this regard. So let's keep our eyes on this moral issue of our time. So turning to the domestic scene. Oh my God, so much has happened. And we're going to get to the Charlie Kirk assassination again. We're going to turn to Jimmy Kimmel and Karen Attiah at the Washington Post near the end. But I just want to begin with a series of stories, just really quickly, just to call your attention to them. Look at what's going on with Trump's request to the Supreme Court to allow him to fire Lisa Cook from the Fed. Now, I wanted to bring this up for just a basic comment. He lied. It was revealed that he lied. Remember the reason for firing her was that she supposedly committed mortgage fraud? That was the reason. And it's revealed that she reported in the paperwork, Reuters, that she declared that home as a vacation home. He lied. But yet, and still, he asks the Supreme Court to allow him to fire her anyway. For what reason? For what reason? See, this is the thing. He gets caught in a lie. People say he's lying. It's proven that he's a liar. And then they move on. And he still gets what he wants. Boom. He still pursues what he wants. No one really lingers on the fact that he lied and tried to destroy Lisa Cook. He lies repeatedly. He's pathological in the way that the president lies. And yet, he's still trying to fire her. And we need to ask fundamental questions. Why? What is the basis? Now, be explicit. He's always going after these Black women. Some issues have arisen around Letitia James, right? And the same thing. So he's lying repeatedly. It seems to me our default position should be that Donald Trump is lying before he tells the truth. He's lying before he tells the truth, it seems to me. But, here we are. So I just wanted to just kind of point your attention to that story. It happened rather quickly. That Reuters reported. It got lost in all of the other crazy stuff that we're dealing with right now. But, he can lie and he can still get what he wants. Seems to be our world, right? Like a spoiled child, but he's more than a monstrous child in some ways. Let's not blame children a monstrous human being in this regard. I also want to call your attention to a couple of stories. There's so much going on. A couple of stories around the Department of Education. They're partnering with 40 organizations, and this is part of the America 250th. And the organizations include Turning Points, Charlie Kirk's organization, and PragerU and Hillsdale College, in order to produce what they're calling patriotic civics. Patriotic civics. And this is that storytelling that they're going to engage in around the semi-quincentennial, right? Where they're going to tell a story of America that is what I call storybook America, right? It's going to be, it's going to erase or make and render invisible the sins of the nation. It's going to, in effect, affirm this fantasy of America as inherently good. And we got to see this evidenced in the way in which they're going to educate our children. And I've always said that this is an important point to note, because, when the lost cause took root, when redemption took root after the collapse of Reconstruction, and collapse is too generous, the murder, the killing of Reconstruction, right? Those children were educated in the lost cause. They were educated in the lost cause. And they then turned out to be the adults resisting efforts. Resisting efforts at, for desegregation and racial justice in the country in the 20th century. It matters how our children are educated. And so they're looking at the long game, telling our children lies so they can believe in the fantasy of America as an example of democracy already achieved. And this is the Department of Education. They've been $137 million redirected from programs that were aimed at STEM and minority teachers and the like, redirected for this patriotic education. Come on, y'all. Something, this is part of what I got. So why I got so overwhelmed. All the trains are running at once for a similar ideological end and purpose. Right? They're trying to, in some ways, browbeat us into submission as they build a world that affirms their view that this country must remain a white republic. And it's all going to come to a head on July 4th, right? July 4th, 2026. That symbolic representation of the founding of the country after 250 years, we're going to be awash in this kitschy, syrupy sentimentality about America's founding that justifies their autocratic leanings. Yes, I called it autocratic. Another story around education, of course, is the redirecting the $500 million that supposedly the Trump administration will be directing to HBCUs, and folk were all excited about it. But I think we need to first put it in context. Remember, the Biden-Harris administration invested $17 billion over 4 years in HBCUs. $17 billion. So people are, Trump giving us $500 million. Right. But we got to put this $500 million in context. So where is it coming from? I'm looking at my data here. Where is it coming from? Right? Well, $500 million cut from programs supporting minority students in science and engineering programs, right? $350 million cut from federal grants at minority serving institutions, many serving substantial Black student populations. You saw that story this week. Nearly $140 million cut from teacher training programs that the administration claimed promoted racially divisive ideology. $140 million cut from those programs. And remember, he's directing money to this so-called patriotic civics education. As he's doing this, $9 million cut from gifted and talented programs. The administration claimed that these programs used racial targeting and recruiting. Right? We have to be very, very careful when we sign on to what Trump is doing, when we celebrate a move, because something comes in tow. something comes in tow. We need to understand what this administration is and not play games with tinkering around the edges when somehow something that they might be doing, right, converges with something that you want. No, 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 no. You cannot get in bed with these people at any time. Our position must always be in opposition to the Trump administration because they're not up to anything good, it seems to me, when it comes to American democracy. Now, all of this, of course, has been framed or is framed by the spectacle of Kash Patel and his performance on the Hill and RFK's performance on the Hill. You see incompetence on full display. The danger, Kash Patel, I'll see you in Valhalla, looking like an utter idiot. I mean, just being honest. And we know that what RFK is doing with vaccinations is endangering the country. Both of them present, in my view, a national security threat. Right? Both of them. Clearly. And, the spectacle, they were performing for an audience of one. It's disgusting on a certain level how these people in the Trump administration and around, the MAGA world, right, seemingly are, so slovenly, kind of in their effort to please this guy. I don't get it on a certain level, how they're willing to grovel and to concede their own autonomy in some ways to this guy, just to have proximity to power or to what they perceive to be power. The fired CDC chief was very clear about, the danger that RFK Jr.'s policies around vaccinations present. This is someone from the MAGA world. Very clear about the dangers, right? So we had to endure that spectacle. And I think what you took away from it is that there's deep incompetence at the helm of much of what is going on in the Trump administration. But I've always been clear about this. All the trains are running. And Trump, to my mind, is a kind of avatar for the greed, the selfishness, and the hatreds. He's allowed to engage in his grift. He's allowed to be petty. He's allowed to be the carnival barker as they, in so many ways, consolidate power in the executive branch, undermine fundamental faith and confidence in democratic institutions, right? Behind the scenes, there's Trump doing what he's doing, but behind the scenes, there are those who are implementing Project 2025 at breakneck speed, at a speed that is just mind-boggling, at a speed that is mind-boggling. And this takes me to what's going on with Charlie Kirk. Last time we talked about, the public square, right? An anemic conception of the public good, our inability to disagree, what that inability means when we're in a country awash in guns, when our opponents are seen as enemies, not fellows, where disagreement is the point, and the object is not to, in some ways, deliberate about what's best for the country or to get to a position where we may change our minds, but rather just simply to perform, right, our ideological commitments in relation to another, to seek to own the libs or to own or to dismiss or demonize our opponents. We talked about that. And, we said that it wasn't going to be easy to actually engage in an assessment of what Charlie Kirk was up to, because we were witnessing in real time the weaponization of his death by those who claim to love him, those who say that they love him. They're using his death, right, as a cudgel, right, to attack free speech, right? Now, I've always been a bit unsettled by how the phrase free speech works. Oftentimes, free speech is invoked to protect hateful speech, right? To protect speech that I find, right, deeply offensive. Now, I've come to understand, right, the power of the absolutist position. As I said last time, I come to understand its power. But I also know that we have to be mindful, right, of forms of speech that seek to undermine our basic values, and we have to be willing to call it out. Now, you have some conservatives who are responding to the attack, to the call, or to folks who are saying that they're being hypocritical. These are the folks who were so-called, free speech absolutists who are now, engaged in an all-out assault on their political opponents. Anybody who says a negative word about Charlie Kirk will find themselves without a job. They will have to face the consequences. I mean, this is coming out of the mouth of the Vice President of the United States who's just making up shit. Right? Excuse my language. And so we see Karen Attiah at the Washington Post losing her job because she actually paraphrased or quoted Charlie Kirk. And, she used black women instead of the 4 black women he talked about. And they said she just made it up, not responding to the claim that that Michelle Obama or Ketanji Brown Jackson or Joanne Reed didn't have the brain processing power, that they just took the place of white people. No, they're not responding to the substance of the claim. They're just saying, instead of mentioning those women specifically, he said black women, and he didn't say that. I mean, you can't, I know I'm being animated here, but you can't assume that these people are coming in good faith. It's a bad faith argument. She loses her job. Last person, black person on the opinion page, hired on the opinion of the Washington Post, gone. You won't see Washington Post links in the weekly wrap-up this week and the weeks to come. Right? And then Jimmy Kimmel gets fired because the FCC chairman, Carr, right, basically issues a kind of mob-like warning, utterance, and Disney immediately acts. Look, free speech is one thing, right? Free speech talk, and we know that private companies and free speech, private companies, you just can't say anything, and your employer don't expect your employer to fire you, to get rid of you. I mean, I'm clear about that, right? And we know, Nexstar and its efforts to allow, to convince the FCC to allow for this merger that will give it more than the 39% cap of audience share and all of this other stuff. There's this business stuff going underneath this, which is actually an indication of an attempt by the right to control mainstream legacy media, to control the very spaces within which Americans get their information, process their news, such that they can engage in informed deliberation about the country. It's an all-out assault on independent news. It's an all-out assault on mainstream media, as it were, it seems to me. Corporate takeover with particular ideological aims and ends. Jeff Jarvis made this point brilliantly on CNN, on Abby Phillips' show the other day. So these folk don't give a damn about free speech. And to my mind, many of them never had. They claim it. They just want to be able to say whatever they want to say without being held to account. And that's the irony, right? They constantly gaslight us. I heard one commentator say that the right has mastered stochastic terrorism, and at the same time, they've mastered being the perennial victim. Right? I mean, it's a really powerful formulation, right? They can do the harm, and then they're so quick to clutch their pearls when they're held to account. But these folk are saying that we're no longer talking about cancel culture. We're talking about the consequence culture, right? The consequence culture. If you say X or Y or Z, there are these consequences that follow. We saw this in relation to students protesting Israel's war in Gaza after October 7th. We saw it. We saw forces literally trying to destroy the lives of young people, many of whom proved to be right in their protest, given what we now know, right? And it's almost following a similar pattern, as it were. So there's this attempt to quell, to crush, right, opposition. And at the same time, there is this effort to coerce us, right, into conceding the mainstreaming of Charlie Kirk's views. Now, let me say that in a much more simple way. When we can't engage in an assessment of the positions that Charlie Kirk held, how can I put this? If we allow them to mainstream his views around diversity, equity, and inclusion, to mainstream his views around gender, to mainstream his views around sexuality, right? To assume that under the guise of free speech that these particular views, right, were held widely by a large swath of Americans, then we are conceding terrain that we ought not to concede. I don't just simply disagree with Charlie Kirk. I reject his worldview. I reject it. I don't, there's an example that always comes to mind, and this is David Walker's appeal in 1829. And he's responding to Thomas Jefferson's notes, Notes of Virginia, where Jefferson is actually thinking out loud that the question of black inferiority has to be settled on the operating table. Right? That these people aren't really human beings. We have to make this decision down on the ground, right? With science, right? In some ways. And David Walker in 1829 I'm not going to argue with that position. How does one argue with the position that denies you dignity and standing? How does one argue with the position that denies your humanity? Right? And so David Walker says, how else do you expect me to respond when you treat us like dogs? And these are the people who are talking about consequences, right? Consequence culture. They want to be free to say anything that they want to say. They want to be able to express any belief that they have. And if I respond in kind to what they're saying, then I'm attacking free speech. But here, in this moment, they want us to consent to their mainstreaming of Charlie Kirk's view. Now, where I come from, how I was raised, you don't revel in the death of anyone. So I'm not making light of his assassination. I'm not making light of the fact that political violence, right, shadows our days, threaten the very foundation of American democracy itself. I'm not making light of that. But this is almost the equivalent of asking folk to accept George Wallace's views after he was shot. Why would people do that? They could be loving, right, and embracing his family and then the like and not wishing him death. But they don't have to embrace his position. They didn't have to embrace his position. But we're being, in some ways, coerced into embracing this stuff. People are being fired. They're losing their jobs. Right? These folk who are so-called free speech absolutists. We're in a moment, y'all, and I don't want to take too much more of your time. We're in a moment. All the trains are running at once. All the trains are running at once. There's this grift. There's the stuff with the tariffs. There's the stuff with the job market. There's the stuff that he's trying to do with the Fed. There's the stuff that he's doing with regards to the administrative state. He's not just simply dismantling it. He's replacing many of these bureaucrats with his loyalists. They're going to be around for a long, long time, right? What he's doing with education, all of this is happening. And these folk who support him are walking around like zombies. It reminds me of Fela Kuti, his track on zombies. Maybe that's what we'll end with today, listening to some Fela and zombies. Well, we're not going to be zombies. We're going to call it out. We're going to replenish. We're going to continue to fight. We're going to have to begin to use our imaginations to figure out how we're going to respond to all of this at scale. As I've been saying over and over again, the traditional forms of protest are not sufficient. We have to do something different. We have to do something to match the scale of the assault on this precious experiment. But we will see what we come up with in the coming days and weeks and months.